and hearing evidence in a quasi-judicial. Now, if someone doesn't like the zoning ordinance and it applies to everybody across the board, well, that's a little different. But if there's someone here with a specific monetary interest at this podium, or that will be soon, says, come tell me when we're all together. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So if we have a project coming before us, we read the staff report, we go out to the site to kind of get a sense of what it looks like. Can we talk to the, if the person happens to be on that site who's proposing the project, are we allowed to talk to that person? I usually don't, but just to clarify.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Okay.
It says the policy prohibits commissioners from discussing the project with the applicant.
Okay.
Prohibits. Now, it is noted, I'm reading that it is expected that commissioners visit the project sites during the review, and then the chairman should take a poll of those who visited the site. So who went out to see the project, and then you would identify the 4 people who did. But if you happen to be out there and the applicant comes up to you, you smile and say, bring your discussion to the commission. I'm here for a site visit, but I can't discuss.
Conversely, if it's a contentious project and there's people, neighbors close by who are opposed to it, same.
So the same rule. It's still an ex parte.
Right.
It's still outside of the judge. You're the judge. It's outside of the judge's chambers, and it's just one side. They just happen to be friends of the groom and not friends of the bride.
Right.
Okay. So both sides. The lobbying has to come from this podium, not outside this room. Okay. Prohibits. So, the question was asked about bylaws and municipal codes. The very last 2 pages of your materials, you got about, I'm going to guess, 85 pages. So the last 2 pages contain this municipal code section. This is the section of the municipal code now, a step above, but it's not inconsistent. But I just wanted to point out that every city has a planning agency, whether or not they activate it. If they don't delegate the planning functions, the city council is the planning agency. But in most cities, one or more planning commissions are created, and so in Marysville, they have delegated to the Planning and Historic Preservation Commission those functions. And so I'm looking at the Municipal Code 2.40.010 says, there is established the Planning and Historic Preservation Commission of the City of Marysville. So the council delegates to this body planning function. And it talks about how 7 members are appointed, talks about how they might be removed, and then going to the second page, you've got to attend meetings or you will disqualify yourself. And then as to meetings itself, it's a much smaller, this is 2.40.060, a much smaller version of your procedures. But it says in pertinent part, 4 members shall constitute a quorum. Got to have 4 people here. No action shall be taken without receiving the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of the commission. So it's the same as your bylaws. Then it says, in holding regular, special, and adjourned meetings, the commission shall abide by the provisions of the Ralph M. Brown Act of the State of California, Government Code Section 54950 et sec. So you're governed by your code, by the Brown Act. It's a perfect segue for me to now take you to the Brown Act. So we will find the Brown Act at the back of your materials. It's about 29 pages from the end, or 67 pages from the beginning, so a little more than 2/3 of the way in. And the materials look like such. So when everybody's got this page up, about 29 pages, we'll start. And I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to go word for word because that would be a 5-hour presentation, but I will go maybe 25% of the language as it pertains to the Planning Commission. And this is where questions are really sort of fun. So barge in when you feel the need. So I'm going to, and it says page 1 of 26 at the top right-hand corner. So I'll give you the page numbers from the top right-hand corner as we go through. So beginning on page 1, section 54.950, it is the intent of the law that the actions of public bodies be taken openly and their deliberations be conducted openly. So who are we talking about? Going down to section 54951, we're talking about a local agency. And the relevant language, a local agency means a city, whether general law or chartered, or any board, commission, or agency thereof. I didn't read the surplus language. So a city and a commission of that city. You are a local agency for purposes of these 26 pages. Legislative body means, going down to B of 54.952, a commission, committee, board, or other body of a local agency. So you are a local agency and you're a legislative body of a local agency. Now on page 2, and I'm on section 54.952.2. We'll cover this one in a little bit of detail because the Brown Act deals with meetings of local agencies and their bodies. So what is a meeting? A meeting means any congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So for the Planning Commission, if we count to 4, and 4 of you are in communication, and I'm going to get to what it means to be present, because it's not just physically present. We now have the potential for a meeting. And all you have to do is hear something. You can also discuss, you can also vote, you can also do a lot of other things. But if you're hearing, you're at a meeting. And it goes on, a majority of the members of a legislative body shall not, outside of a meeting authorized by this chapter, which we'll get to in a minute, what does it mean to have an authorized meeting, use a series of communications of any kind directly or through intermediaries to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of business that is within the subject matter of the legislative body. So the word discuss really is a broad word, and that's because it doesn't have to be anything on an upcoming agenda. It doesn't have to be anything that might come up in the future. It's just within your jurisdiction, within the jurisdiction. 4 of you are somehow communicating, discussing something within the jurisdiction of your body. You are involved in a meeting. All right. And then we talk about the exceptions. So I'll go through the exceptions that don't count, that aren't a meeting under the law. So I'm on B2. It says paragraph 1, which talked about 4 of you discussing, should not be construed as preventing an employee or official of a local agency from engaging in separate conversations if that person does not communicate to the members of the body the comments or position of any other member or members. What's a good example? Mr. Palazzo goes to each of you and talks to you about something that may or may not be coming up. He doesn't say anything. You don't know whether he's met with anyone else. He doesn't share with you anything. Those are individual contacts. And as long as it isn't a quasi-judicial issue, you're okay. Individual contacts. Discuss among themselves. So now we're going to get into some technicalities. What does it mean to discuss among themselves? It means communications made, posted, or shared on an internet-based social media platform between members of a legislative body, including comments or the use of digital icons that express reactions to communications made by members of the legislative body. So I predicted this years ago. I said, the internet is no different than a billboard, it's no different than writing on a tablet, and now, recently, the legislature says that's the case. So, you definitely now communicate by social media. And so let's talk about something there. It says, so be careful with social media, be careful with reply all to an email, because you've now started to discuss, you've now started to hear things within the jurisdiction of your body, and using the electronic format is no different than doing it face-to-face. So let's talk about what is okay, and then we'll get to some specifics. So now I'm at the bottom of page 2, and it's paragraph C. Nothing in this section shall impose requirements of this chapter on, number 1, individual contacts or conversations, as long as that person isn't sharing with you what they've heard from others. Number 2, attendance by a majority at a conference or similar gathering open to the public that is general issues. So the League of California Cities or other seminars, perfectly okay. I always like to run up to, obviously, a group of council members from another city who are sitting at a table having lunch, and I said, City Attorney, Brown Act. So they all know to do what they should. So attendance by a majority at an open and publicized meeting organized to address a topic of local community's concern. So somebody wants to talk about filling the potholes, something, and they have a community meeting, and a majority of you can go there. But there's a language here that says provided. Provided that a majority of the members do not discuss among themselves, other than part of the scheduled program, business of a specific nature that is within the subject matter of the legislative body of the local agency. So yes, if you're going to talk about potholes and you're on the agenda, you go talk about potholes, but then you don't go back to the table and talk about something else with 3 more of your members. Next page, 3 of 26 at the top. Attendance of a majority at an open and noticed meeting or another body of a local agency. Again, provided that language, provided that you don't do, while you're there, go beyond it. So you can go to a council meeting. You can go to a committee meeting of your board, but don't start chatting amongst yourselves, just go to the meeting. Attendance at a purely ceremonial function, of course. Attendance at a meeting of a standing committee. So those are all exceptions, as long as you abide by the provided that we don't talk about other things that aren't part of the event. So, all right, I'm going to now go to page 4.
So, quick question.
Yes.
What about like the hub and spoke, where you have a conversation with different people, but you're all not in a group? You know, can you kind of elaborate?
Old-fashioned word of mouth. Let's cover that. That's real easy. So the hub and spoke is one person that says, Mr. Bramer, here's what I think about that project. How do you think? You know, I think this, you think that, we have a discussion. And then you say, Mr. Buck, you know what Mr. Bramer thinks about that? He doesn't like it. And I don't think you should like it. You agree with me? Ms. McKenzie, what about you? You know, I've heard from these 2 people. You got it? I get to 4 people for you, and now I've gone beyond the line. I've told a majority what the rest of you are thinking, and yet none of you have heard from each other. So that's sort of a, or it can start like, what was the gossip game you played in school, where one person would say something and the next person. So you can say you get to you get the 5, 6 and 7 out there. So it doesn't have to be one person going amongst you. It could be all of you just talking. It's that sharing of knowledge between you. So it can just old-fashioned word of mouth works just fine to violate the Brown Act. Okay. So page 4 of 26, 54.952.6, action taken means a collective decision, collective commitment or promise to make a decision or an actual vote. So you don't have to actually vote. You can take action by nodding your head or giving a thumbs up or thumbs down icon. That is enough to express yourself. All right. So here's the heart of the Brown Act, and it's 54.953. Here it is. All meetings of the legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency, except as provided. So if you're not an exception, and the exception is in this law right here, open public discussion. That's the first leg, and the second leg we're going to get to in a minute. So open and public. We're going to get to it in a minute. Go to page 5. Just a couple of little things. 54.953.2, you have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. 54.953.3, you can be anonymous. If you're a member of the public, you don't have to register or tell us who you are. It's purely voluntary. 54.953.6, the public has the right to audio and video record your meetings as long as they don't disrupt the proceedings. They can transmit them, they can publish them, they can have a live feed if they don't disrupt the proceedings. And then,
Paul has questions.
yes, go ahead. What's the question?
Can you hear me?
I got you. Go ahead.
On the Brown Act, the Planning Commission gets a packet. They review the information openly, and then I call up each individual planning commissioner early in the week to see if they have any follow-up questions on the staff material before they deliberate on Wednesday. I kind of consistently do that. I assume that's not a Brown Act or ex parte communication.
That is you doing your job the right way.
Okay, thank you. So when I call you next week, we're not ex parte.
You're not ex parte. Mr. Richardson is making sure each of you understands what you received and that you're okay with it. And if not, he's going to clarify. But what he's not going to do is he's not going to talk about anybody else or what they think or say or feel.
Correct.
So individual contacts are fine. When the person making the because you may be the only person contacted for all you know by that person. But Mr. Richardson is just doing his job when he goes to each of you and asks, do you have any questions? He's not sharing what the others feel. And he won't. And that won't be a violation of the Brown Act. City managers do that all the time with the council. Council members call the manager, what's this on the agenda? And they'll get whatever briefing they want. But the manager does not share any other communications from other council members, and that's perfectly fine. The whole point is the Brown Act wants the public to see actions taken collectively where everybody sees and hears the information at the same time, sees the deliberations at the same time. Happy, Paul?
This might be off topic, but why would why would I go to each commissioner and ask whether they have issues on a staff memo or questions on a staff memo? Wouldn't that be?
You should not.
Well,
We're going the wrong way. This is your staff support. This is your staff support asking you, Ben, do you have a question?
Oh, I thought that was a commissioner on the line.
No,
Okay.
I would, the hair on the back of my neck would start standing up.
Yeah.
That's not right. No.
Okay, so staff approaches this.
Yes.
Okay.
Your staff support approaches you and says, you've got this packet of materials. Is there anything you didn't understand or need clarification? Right at the top of page 6, each legislative body of a local agency shall provide by ordinance, resolution, bylaws, or other whatever rule is required for the conduct of the business of that body and the time and place of holding regular meetings. So yes, you can have bylaws, but I don't usually see them for planning commissioners. But now, let's see here. Here's an anachronism. At the bottom of page 6, 54954.1 allows a person to request to have a copy of the agenda packet mailed to them. Years ago, when I started this business, this was a big deal. Nobody cares anymore because it's all posted on the internet. And so now, on the top of page 7 is the second major prong and reason why the Brown Act exists. We have to be open and public, and at the top of the page, at least 72 hours before a regular meeting, the legislative body of the local agency shall post an agenda containing a brief description of each item of business to be transacted at that meeting, including blah, blah, blah. So there's the Brown Act in its densest form. The public gets to know 72 hours in advance, what are you going to be talking about? What might you be taking action on? And then at the appointed hour, we get to see what's going on. That is the Brown Act if you condensed it down to its essence. Then there are some website postings and how you do that. And at the bottom of page 7, no action or discussion shall be undertaken on an item not appearing on the posted agenda. So that's the Brown Act. You put the agenda out, the public's there, you don't take action unless it's on the agenda. The exceptions accept. You can briefly respond to questions people might ask. You can refer it and a few others, but make a brief announcement going over to page 8. Make a reference to staff to look into the matter. And then here's a couple of exceptions, and the only one that really applies to the planning commission. Top of page 8, subdivision B. Notwithstanding A, the legislative body may take actions on items of business not appearing on the posted agenda. Prior to discussing the item, we have to do, and here I'm going down to 2, because that's the one that counts. Upon a determination by a 2/3 vote of the members of the legislative body present at the meeting, or if less than 2/3 are present, a unanimous vote, that there is a need to take immediate action, and that the need for action came to the attention of the local agency after the agenda was posted. So if you put out your 72-hour notice, and some email comes from the state of California says, if we don't have this resolution, you're going to lose the whatever. Then you can say, well, the need went out, the need to take action was made known to us after the regular agenda, so we can, by a 2/3 vote, add it and deal with it. So that's just about the only exception you're going to see as a planning commission. Excuse me. Middle of page 8. Every agenda for regular meetings shall provide an opportunity for members of the public, you're reading my mind, to directly address the legislative body on any item of interest to the public before or during the legislative body's consideration of the item, provided no action may be taken on matters not appearing on the agenda. So if you have some action you're going to propose, the public gets to come to the podium, tell you what they think before you take action, and they can also address you on what I call unrelated items. You can't take action on them until a meeting where you have that on your agenda, but they do have that right. And then a special meeting is a meeting that's on 24 hours notice, and either the chairman or a majority of the body can call a special meeting, 24 hours notice. For a special meeting, you're limited to just what's on the agenda. You can't even add something that came up later. And for a special meeting, you basically stick to just the issue, and public comments are limited to just what's on the agenda for that particular meeting. So, going over to page 9, now we're going to move at light speed. There are exceptions to the open and public requirement. They're called closed sessions. I don't think any of them are going to apply to the Planning Commission. Paul, if you're out there, you can tell me if you've ever had a closed session Planning Commission meeting. I don't think so. But there are, pardon me?
I've never had a closed session before with a Planning Commission in my entire 40-year career.
Thank you. That's been my experience too, because none of the exceptions apply. I will just say you've got the materials, so you can read through page 12 just for fun if you feel like it, but it doesn't apply to you. So if we were doing city council ethics training, we would spend another 15 minutes on these exceptions, but you're going to be spared all of that. If you go to page 12, however, and near the bottom, section 54.955, the legislative body of a local agency may adjourn any regular, special, or adjourn special meeting to a time and place specified in the order of adjournment. Less than a quorum may so adjourn from time to time. If all members are absent, then the clerk or secretary can post an order of adjournment. If you have less than 4 people at your meeting, you've lost your quorum. The meeting has either ended or, at a minimum, postponed. So if someone gets the phone call and they walk out of the room and you were at 4 and now you're at 3, you're either going to say, we're going to pause while Smith takes his phone call and comes back, or you're going to say, oh, meeting adjourned, see you later. All right. Same thing with public hearings. You do have public hearings. Any hearing being held or noticed or ordered to be held at any time may be continued to a subsequent meeting. So if it is 1 a.m. and you just had it and you need to come back later, you can adjourn your meeting. And if you've chopped off your public comment, you don't have to take more public comment at the adjourned meeting because you've already allowed for it. It's the opportunity to comment, not the absolute right. If you missed your opportunity, you missed your opportunity. It is up to the chair to determine whether to open it back up if the hearing has been closed. And then page 13.
Quick question on that. Yeah. Okay, so say if you have 5 items, 5 action items.
Yeah.
Start with 1, it's going forever. Can you stop that and go, let's move on to 2, 3, 4, and then adjourn and come back at a later meeting to discuss them? Or do you have to go through?
Were I the chair, I sure would. I would say, this is taking forever, and we're gonna pause on this. Let's take up items 2, 3, 4, and 5, because I see people in the audience who want to get them disposed of, and then you come back to that. That's your rules. And we've covered your rules now. Don't prohibit that. So if it's not prohibited, I would pause. I'd say, we're going to pause on this. Everybody who's there, sit down, and the 2 or 3 people on the other items will dispense with those. There is, if we're going to talk Robert's rules, if you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you've got the big one first, someone under Robert's rules could call for the orders of the day, which means we have to follow the agenda in its stated order. But assuming nobody here made that objection, that parliamentary objection, the chair can just buzz through the other items. And as a body, you can suspend the procedural rules. You can't suspend the Brown Act. You can't suspend the charter, but your own procedural rules, you can, well, not the stated ones, but the Roberts rules ones, you can suspend those. So the default rules, if it applies, you can. And so there's nothing in your rules that would prohibit what you've said. And I would, if I'm the chair, I would entertain, Mr. Chair, if we would take up these items. And if nobody objects, you do. All right. Top of page 13, special meeting, 24 hours notice. And page 14, 15, 16, these are more closed session, 17, 18, 19. Hey, we don't have to do that. Page 20. In the middle of the page, section 54.957.5. Agendas of public meetings and any other writings, when distributed to a majority of all, or a majority of all the members by any person in connection with the matter, are disclosable public records. So if the city provides the items, they should have copies for the public to come up and take a copy. If a member of the public provides copies, then you can make a copy for them after the meeting. But essentially everything that you consider at the time it is distributed becomes a public record. So think about that. And maybe the public should think about that if they want to give you something. All right, let's see, page 21. Just says if hooligans interrupt your, at the bottom, if hooligans interrupt your meeting, you can clear the room and readmit the people who aren't disruptive. Page 22, 54.959. Small item, each member of a legislative body who attends a meeting where action is taken in violation of any provision of this chapter, remember, action taken doesn't require a vote. And where the member intends to deprive the public of information to which a member knows or has reason to know the public is entitled is guilty of a misdemeanor. So if you're meeting quietly, 4 or more, and you don't have to vote, you just make some sort of commitment, you're guilty of a misdemeanor. And next one, the district attorney or any interested person can go to court to prevent violations. And this page at top of page 23, same thing, except they can actually set aside action taken. And that's specific to either the 72-hour agenda or open in public. Now, you could violate other provisions of the Brown Act. You won't let the guy have his video camera. You won't let him make a public comment. Those are also violations, and the court could say don't do that anymore. But if you don't have an agenda or you take action secretly, the judge can invalidate that action. So that's fairly significant. Page 25, if you're taken to court, the person taking you to court can recover their attorney's fees if you're wrong. And just for emphasis, in case you missed it, at the bottom of page 25, it says, except as authorized by this chapter, and the chapter is what we've been talking about. No closed session may be held by any legislative body. You don't hold closed sessions. There's something amiss if you're in closed session. You should say, why are we doing this? But that is a walking survey of what I believe are relevant portions of the Brown Act for our planning commission. You've got the whole thing, and if you wish, read away. There's other stuff in there, and it is of interest for city council meetings. And if you're curious, you too can inform yourself.
I have one quick question.
Before we move on to other stuff. Yeah.
In these days of Zoom meetings,
Yes.
does attending a meeting over Zoom, does that count as open meetings? I mean, allowing the public to, and if somebody doesn't have the capability of, viewing a meeting through Zoom, do they have to be let in?
Brave new world, right?
Yeah.
Since about March, April. Because this meeting, but for COVID, would violate the Brown Act. Because anyone who wants to attend can see it and hear it and all of that. So we're a living exception. And can someone say I'm technologically challenged? Or I don't have the cash to buy an internet service connection and a computer?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually an argument that's floating out there. I think the answer is going to be, if push comes to shove, we have to set up a screen somewhere accessible. That's got to be the answer, and just space them out. Now, we're lucky in here that we can all sort of distance ourselves. But if you added about 10 more people, it's very good. We're living with executive orders. Does the governor really have the power? I don't know. I mean, that's an open question. And some judges
If somebody challenged
some
it.
judges have suggested he doesn't have the power
Yeah.
to just declare this. But yeah, this meeting would be a violation, assuming there was someone who wanted to walk in the door and sit here. It would otherwise be a violation. So we're doing the best we can, which is putting it out over the airwaves. So let the electrons stream for now. This time next year, assuming that we've got everything under control, we'll all be back in person, and all of these rules will apply. Any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go
It's,
ahead.
it's more about the email strings.
Yes.
Or maybe we should mention it.
Yes?
I talked to, say, Commissioner Bowden, he sends me an email, and then I send it to someone else. It's the same as going, I think we had that issue too. That's why I was bringing it up before, we were kind of getting close to the point where
It
we're.
is. So, dare I say, the three of you could get together and plot? You could, but don't, please, because then all you got to do is get one more person involved, and now you've got the four. But yeah, the two of you could exchange back and forth all you want, but there's a problem with forwarding, there's a problem with reply all, because now you've very easily gotten four people, a majority, a quorum, hearing business, and it's not open in public, and it wasn't pursuant to a 72-hour agenda. So I don't consider email any different than if you were just talking to each other, and then you started talking to a third person. So,
Yeah, I think before it was, we all got something from a staff member no longer here, and then people started replying, and we tried to watch that, I guess, is what I don't want us to get in. And we weren't discussing voting on anything at the time, but it looked like it was going that direction, so.
well, the nice thing about email is if you really are talking about the weather or the ball game, then we all know you aren't talking about, but when there's four of you sitting at a dinner table in public, you're creating a perception that maybe you're not abiding. Now, you may genuinely just talk about the weather and the ball game, but it's pretty tough to have the four, in your case, together, electronically or otherwise. So, as long as you're exclusive, as long as you're faithful to just the two of you electronically, but once it gets shared, then you're opening yourself up to allegation.
Better off just don't talk.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you surrender a little bit of your First Amendment to be on a public board. And it's okay, because there's all sorts of other things you can talk about in different settings that are okay, but I'm conservative when it comes to those communications. But I will acknowledge 3 of you can talk about whatever you want, including the business of the commission, but you just risk very easily going over the line. So.
My experience on the council and with different council members, especially I'm thinking of Chris Patago, lots of times, you make a phone call to talk to somebody about something, and maybe, for example, I would not have talked to anybody about it yet, but if I call Chris and if he's already talked to somebody about it, he would say, oh, I can't talk to you about that. I've already talked to Bill. So he was holding himself accountable and letting me know. It's like, oh no, so I think that's up to each individual really to keep count in your head and be able to say, oh, sorry, I already talked about that to somebody else. So in that way we can hold ourselves and each other accountable and just keep it honest and keep it clean.
For most people, it gets sort of apparent when people have talked about something in advance, and then you get into discussion. Yeah. So now, I'm going to start at the beginning. So we'll start with the front page of your materials, AB 1, 2, 3, 4 training. And topics to be talked about: personal financial gain, claiming prerequisites of office, government transparency, and laws related to fair process, and Form 700. So we've already talked about half of that, I'd say. And you're here because you have to get a minimum of 2 hours of training every 2 years in these areas. So we're going to now go to laws that deal with personal financial gain and prohibitions against personal gain. And there are conflicts of interest, bribery, extra compensation. Campaign contributions doesn't really count. This is an appointed board. You don't campaign for office, so we won't care too much about that. If you were on the city council, we would cover that. And so you have general duties to avoid conflicts, or even the appearance or possibility of a conflict, because people want to see you perform impartially, free from bias caused by your own financial interests, and free from bias caused by the financial interests of your supporters. So if we go to page 4, we're going to start with the Political Reform Act, which created the Fair Political Practices Commission. And the commission is responsible for enforcing a number of laws related to politics. One of those laws deals with financial interests. And so at the top of page 4 is the basic prohibition. No public official at any level of state or local government shall make, participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his official position to influence a governmental decision in which he knows or has reason to know he has a financial interest. So, financial interest is an economic interest. It doesn't have to involve a contract. And the Fair Political Practices Commission, the FPPC, regulates this process. So, some time back, there was an 8-step process to analyze whether you had a conflict. The FPPC shortened it to 4 steps, but really we have to keep it at about 6 because the first 2 are fairly important. So, the first question, which is always a yes for planning commissioners, is, are you a public official? For you, it's always yes. Maybe that's why the FPPC wanted to disregard the test. But if you're not a public official, it doesn't matter. You're not covered by the conflict. So persons who are members, officers, employees, or consultants of a public agency, consultants. So sometimes a consultant is and sometimes a consultant isn't, but planning commissioners are always public officials. The second question, and now we're starting to analyze things, is what are your financial interests? So, and it has a definition, and there are certain limits. So a business entity is a financial interest if you have a direct investment worth at least $2,000. So the $10 Starbucks card in your wallet isn't a sufficient interest in Starbucks for you to have to worry about that. But if you have a business where your interest in that business is $2,000 or more, that's a financial interest. Same limit with real property. Real property, if your interest in the property is $2,000 or more, that piece of property is a financial interest. A source of income. And the source of income, what's the limit there? At least $500 provided or promised to the official or received by the official within 12 months prior to a governmental decision. And it could include gifts or loans. It excludes loans made by banks that are available to the general public. So the Bank of America loan you have on your house doesn't prevent you from hearing about Bank of America's application to build a bank down the street. So that's not a financial interest. So we're still continuing on with step 2. Any business entity, whether you have a $2,000 interest or not, in which you are a director, officer, partner, trustee, or employee, or hold any position of management. So let's say you have a partnership and it doesn't make any money and it's not worth a dime, but that partnership in which you are a partner is a financial interest for purposes of your possible disqualification. Any donor of gifts, they have to give you at least $470 within the last 12 months prior to the decision. But if you've received $470 or more in gifts, that person or that donor, that company, whoever it is that gave you these gifts, is a financial interest in. And then, of course, your personal finances. So if it involves you personally, it's about as close as it gets. So are you, number 1, are you a public official? Yes, for you. Number 2, do you have a financial interest? And we've talked about the types of entities, people, persons that would be a financial interest. So here comes the third step now. Is it reasonably foreseeable that the decision you're going to make, the governmental decision you're going to make, will have a financial effect on your financial interest? So there are 2 ways, and let's use your employer. That's a source of income. Hopefully your job pays you more than $500 a year. So your employer comes to the podium and has a project they want approved. Well, you having earned more than $500 in the last year from your employer is a financial interest, and they're at the podium. So is it reasonably foreseeable that there will be a financial effect on your financial interest? If your employer is standing at the podium, the decision will be a direct one because it directly affects your employer. Or if it's your company, even better, that decision is going to directly affect you. But it can also be indirectly involved. Sometimes the decision isn't, maybe your employer isn't standing here, but as a result of the decision, on the facts in question, maybe your employer will get some business that will come their way that they wouldn't otherwise get if the decision went the other way. So that's an indirect, and the employer isn't here, but somebody else is here, and their decision will affect your indirectly affect your interest. So let's see.
One quick question. Yeah. So my employer is the California State Senate. How impactful, if anything, affects the state would that have to be before it comes into being a conflict?
The good news is that employment by a public entity doesn't count.
Wonderful.
All right. They thought of you, I guess, when they wrote the rules. And this brings up an important point. I'll get to my punchline right now. My punchline is, by the time we're done with this, I don't want anybody here to feel they have to be able to remember these rules and answer a conflicts question. I want you to be able to recognize you may have a conflict and call Mr. Richardson or, he'll get it to me. Whatever analysis has to be done, we'll get the analysis in advance of the meeting. So when you get an agenda, just say, could this affect some interest of mine? And if the answer is maybe, then get to the bottom of it. And we'll find out if there's a special rule for governmental income. And we'll decide whether or not you have to be disqualified or not. So that's why you got to my punchline, but thanks. I appreciate that. So financial interests are I'm at the top of page 8, are explicitly involved in the decision. If the interest is a named party or the subject of a governmental decision. So your boss standing here, directly involved. Subject of a financial interest is the subject of a proceeding if a decision involves the issuance, renewal, approval, denial, or revocation of any license, permit, or other entitlement to or contract with the financial interest and includes any governmental decision affecting a real property financial interest. In these cases, it is presumed to be reasonably foreseeable, which is the next test. If there's direct involvement, we're going to also get reasonably foreseeable that it will impact you personally. Even if a financial interest is not explicitly involved in the decision, it may still be reasonably foreseeable with certain factors. So now your boss isn't here asking for a rezone. Your boss is somewhere else, but the decision might affect your income. And the question is whether you should anticipate a financial effect on your personal interest, or whether you would be typically affected by the governmental decision. Would it create an advantage or a disadvantage? Would your decision create an advantage or a disadvantage to, I keep using the boss example, but it could be an investment, it could be real property, it could be any of your interests. So, step 3, if it's not reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a financial effect on your interests, then there's no conflict. If it's determined that it is reasonably foreseeable, then you have to determine whether the effect is material. Okay, so there will be an effect, does it matter? And so step 4. With business entities, it is material whenever the business entity initiates the proceeding, offers to make a sale or a service, bids or enters into a written contract, is the named manufacturer in a purchase order, provides products to the agency that aggregates $1,000 or more in 12 months, applies for a permit, license, grant, tax, credit, exception, variance, or should be entitlement with the agency, is the subject of any inspection action or proceeding, or is otherwise subject to action taken. So, step 4. Business entities, if it does not fall within the specific items, it may be material if, and here's the catch-all, a prudent person with sufficient information would find it is reasonably foreseeable that the decision's material effect would contribute to the change in the price of the business entity's publicly traded stock or the value of the privately held business interest. So we're still going on step 4 to determine materiality. Examples, what might be material meets the catch-all. If it authorizes, prohibits, or regulates, or otherwise establishes conditions for an activity in which the business is engaged. So does it change the rules of engagement? Increase or decrease in the amount of competition? You're granted a monopoly. Increase or decrease in need of the products or services that the business entity supplies. Increase or decrease the tax burden, debt, or financial legal liability of the entity. So that's materiality for business entities. Now, for real property, what does materiality mean? There are 12 standards. So real property, we used to say, is it 500 feet away or not? And that was a bright line. That's no longer the case. 500 feet is still a part of the consideration, but you can see there are 12 different factors that you consider as to whether a real property interest in which you own $2,000 or more could be materially affected by the decision. And let's see, involves adoption or amendment of a general plan, zoning, would repeal or modify taxes, fees, assessments, authorizes sale or purchase of the parcel, involves insurance, denial, etc., a license, involves the construction of improvements, would change the development potential of the parcels, would change the income producing potential, would change the highest and best use, would change the character of the parcel. And then we have the 500-foot rule, which creates a presumption, but it's not a bright line. And then would a reasonably prudent person consider it to be material? So with real property, materiality is a weighing test. If it's a source of income, now we're back to the boss example for materiality. Any reasonably foreseeable financial effect on an individual, organization, or business entity that is a source of income is deemed material. Pretty small. And then on page 12 at the top, it talks about more materiality factors for purposes of source of income materiality. The bottom, gifts are basically treated like a source of income for purposes of the analysis. We get to personal finances. A reasonably foreseeable effect on you or your immediate family's finances is considered material if the official or immediate family will receive a measurable financial benefit or loss from the decision. A penny sounds measurable, okay? And then here are some examples that aren't material. Change of retirement benefits, reimbursement for travel expenses allowed by law, stipends, and then a use of government property, including automobiles, et cetera, that were provided for your personal, for your use in your job. So, are you a public official? Yes. Do you identify a potential financial interest? Let's say yes. Is it reasonably foreseeable that there'll be a direct or indirect effect? Let's say yes. And let's say it's material, it's big enough. Well, now you do have a conflict unless the public generally exception applies. And a good example is rates, sewer rates, water rates. You would never be able to pass a rate as a council member if you couldn't vote on the matter. And so if a substantial segment of the public is affected the same way, 25% of all businesses, 25% of all real property, 25% of everyone inside the jurisdiction, well, then we're all going to sink or swim with this decision. And so even though all of the other 4 tests were yeses, we're still okay. But if that decision has a unique and disproportionate effect on you, then you've stepped back out of the public generally exception. So as long as you are affected like everybody else, then we could still let you vote even though the other 4 tests were met. And finally, there's this rule of necessity. Let's say 4 of you are disqualified. We don't have a quorum now, do we? No. We'll readmit one of you, probably draw straws or something, to make a quorum. But that's only in strict necessity. If you got a tie, if you got a tie vote, I'm sorry, that isn't a necessity. 3-3, gee, we'd like to have that tie broken. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. So, let's do a couple of fun examples. Go to page 16. Councilmember Sam owns 100 shares of Marysville Utilities, which is the sole utility supplier in the city of Marysville. Shares are traded over the counter at $21 a share. Big Time Developer requests approval of a 3,500 unit subdivision to be served by Marysville Utilities. May Sam participate? You're shaking your head. Well, okay. Is Sam a public official?
Yes.
He is. What's the financial interest you've identified?
His stock with the company.
Is Marysville Utilities in front of the council?
Oh, the developer.
Big Time Developer.
Served by that. Okay, no.
Well, don't let me talk you out of it. How much is Sam's interest worth?
He's got, well, I don't know, 100 shares, right?
100 shares, and they trade for how much? 2,100. 2,100. So he's got a 2,000 or more interest in Marysville Utilities.
And so even though I'm not in the room, they'll still benefit from the decision.
You're right, because let's do the math.
Right.
If he's the sole utility supplier and we're going to add 3,500 new customers, and let's just say the utility bill's $100 I don't know, I don't know how much electricity people use, but even if it's $100 a month, it's going to be $350,000 of income to his utility per month, 4.2 million per year. So yes, his interest is more than 2,000 in the utility company that's going to foreseeably have 4.2 million in extra revenue by this new subdivision. You're right. And the point is, Marysville Utilities was not in front of the board and had nothing to do with Big Time Developer, but the customers would go to Sam's company. You're right. All right. Oops. Let's try page 17. Ken is a member of the Fairy Tale Community Services District. FTCSD has been asked to extend sewer service to attractive land for a new Indian gaming facility. Ken owns commercially zoned property about a half mile from the casino. May Ken participate in the decision? Well, is he a public official? Of course. Does he have a financial interest? I'm going to assume commercially zoned property is worth more than $2,000. It wasn't given to me in the facts, but I'm just going to assume there's no commercial lot anywhere that's worth less. Is it reasonably foreseeable that the governmental decision, which is now going to put a sewer line going by his commercial property, could that affect his use? Yeah, of course. And there's no facts to support a public generally exception. I mean, it's his specific property. So Ken probably should not be voting on this, because even though, again, these two examples are put here because his property isn't seeking a rezone, but the effect of this will go right by his front door and give him probably a significant benefit in value and or whatever opportunity. All right, so what do you do when a conflict exists? Leave the room. Or a little more succinctly, identify your interest, leave the room, refrain from participating, and we'll come and get you when we've made the vote. So back to my punchline. It would be great if you went through this and memorized all of this, but really, all of you have to file a Form 700 and disclose your financial interests. You just make a list of them, and when you get an agenda, just look at them and ask yourself, am I Ken? Am I Marysville Utilities? Is this something that might affect me even though I'm not the one that's the applicant or my boss isn't the applicant? And then if you think maybe, ask for an opinion. So you've gotten some basics here, but I would say ask for the opinion when the time comes. Any questions on this segment before we move on? Okay. Page 19, Government Code Section 1090 prohibits a public officer from being interested in any contract with their agency in which they are financially involved. Contract with your agency in which you're financially involved. So the prohibition is absolute, and it doesn't matter how fair it is. You could have the most wonderful sweetheart deal, and your board, you're practically giving away whatever it is the contract is talking about. It doesn't matter. You cannot contract with your agency. You can't vote. You can't design the specifications. You can't have any preliminary discussions. You can't negotiate. Certainly don't actually sign the contract. So, test, are you an officer or an employee? The answer is always yes. Is there a contract? Well, it depends on what the topic is. Did you make the contract? And it doesn't take much to make a contract. All you have to do is vote, design specs, preliminary discussions, negotiate, all right? And then do you have a financial interest? So, ask yourself, would you potentially realize a private gain? Would the interest cause you to have divided loyalties? All financial interest, no matter how small, 1 penny is sufficient. Okay. Financial interest, no matter how indirect. So, there are a few exceptions. One is called the remote interest exception. If it's remote, you can disqualify yourself, the board can take action. If it's a non-interest, then it doesn't count, and then both you and the board can take action. So, let's look at a remote interest, page 22. A remote interest, the employees or official of a nonprofit. So it's a nonprofit corporation, you're a member of it, you disqualify yourself, the board can deal with the nonprofit. You're an employee of a private party if there's 10 or more employees and you've been employed for more than 3 years. So it's a remote, you disqualify yourself, the board can deal with your employer in that situation. And FPPC, you would also have a financial disqualification under the FPPC, wouldn't you? So you'd have a double disqualification, but if it's just a disqualification, you leave the room, the board can still take action. Interest of a parent in the minor child's earnings, salary or per diem directly involved with governmental department out there on the radio waves. There it is. It's not in the FPPC context, but there it is in the 1090 context, and the same would hold true for the regulations under the FPPC. and then a supply of goods or services that have been happening for 5 years before you took office. These are remote, you are disqualified, you leave the room, the board can still take action. All right. So the interest, if it's remote, the interest must be disclosed to the board, it must be noted in the records, you must abstain, and the board still has to authorize the contract in good faith. Then here are some interests that are non-interests, they don't count, so you're not disqualified, you can vote, the board can vote. Stock ownership, 3% or less, or excuse me, less than 3%. Your spouse's employment, if employed in the same position more than a year. Salary or per diem from a non-directly involved governmental department. Non-interest applies, doesn't count, everybody can vote. So harsh consequences. If you don't fall into the remote interest or non-interest, you lose the benefit of the bargain completely. Now, I'll give you a real bad example. A council member is being sued by the city for eminent domain. The city wants his property. Councilman says, this is silly. I agree with the price. Let's just settle the case. They settle the case. A citizen says, settlement is a contract. You were involved in the contract. Court says, you're right. Give back the money. He had to give back the money. He didn't get his house back. That's how harsh it is. Now, I will say, I use that example. They have legislatively carved out a little bitty exception for eminent domain. So that could happen and he wouldn't lose his house today and he wouldn't have to give back the money. But in just about any other context, that's how harsh the result is for violating this. Let's do a couple of quick examples. On September 30, 2004, Minnie is hired by the Marysville Water District. On November 5th, 2005, Minnie's husband Mickey is elected to the MWD Board of Directors, and on December 1, 2005, a proposed MOU granting a 4% salary increase for the employees, including Minnie, comes before the board. What is Mickey going to do? Yes, you're right, Mickey's okay. The board is making a contract. Mickey has a financial interest, but he can't vote, but she's been there for more than a year. Yes, Minnie was employed more than a year, Mickey didn't participate. However, we turn the page, watch out. If Minnie got a raise in a new position in less than a year, she's no longer been in the same position for a year, and we'd have a problem. So, all right. Bottom of page 26, pretty self-explanatory. Bribery, we all know what bribery is. Even without the legal definition, giving or promising to give anything of present prospective value, advantage, with a corrupt intent to unlawfully influence the recipient's actions, vote, or opinion. All right. What happens? You go to prison, you forfeit office, and you'll never hold public office again. I hope I never have to have a practical example to cite of that, because that one's one of the obvious ones. Page 27 at the top, not applicable to planning commissioners, because you don't campaign for office. All right. There is a revolving door law. Public official may not participate in making or influence governmental decisions relating to anyone with whom they've been negotiating or had arrangements, and it's a 1-year limitation. Page 28, 1 year after leaving office, and there are certain people you can't deal with.
So, I have a question on that one. So
Yeah.
if someone's on this board, they can't, I mean, whatever reason, they can't get back and try to influence us, they get public comments, I assume.
I'm sorry.
Well, say one of us wasn't on the board next month and we come back, I want to influence our decision by giving comments, that's completely previous board members, I guess.
Are you being paid by the applicant?
Could be.
No. If you just want to have a member of your public say, you know, we talked about this before when I was on the board, it was a bad idea then, it's a bad idea now. Okay, but if you're an advocate, you're being employed, you want to be employed, or you want to work as an advocate for the applicant, no, 1 year, revolving door. Let's see here. Gifts, honoraria, traveling expenses. So the Political Reform Act restricts the receipt of gifts, travel payments, and honoraria by public officials. A gift, we sort of know what that is. Payment or benefit confers a personal benefit for which you don't provide some consideration in exchange. Page 30, what are the limitations? Evaluate each gift to see if the following provisions are triggered. Cannot accept any gifts from one source worth more than $470 in a single calendar year if required to report gifts from that source. You are disqualified from participating in decisions involving the source of gifts of more than $470 within the previous 12-month period. Gifts aggregating $50 or more in a calendar year must be reported on Form 700. And then the city might have a conflict of interest code to provide further information. So, I give you 2 Gold Sox tickets, buy you 2 hot dogs and the drink of your choice. I've probably not given you a reportable gift. $50. Change the word Gold Sox to San Francisco Giants. I've given you definitely a reportable gift, more than $50, and if you are sitting down on the first baseline front row seats, it's probably a $470 plus disqualifying gift if I were to show up and want you to vote for my project. All right? I make that 25 Gold Sox tickets, maybe I'll get there. Anyway.
So this would go through, say, okay, I'm not going to accept the tickets, but then if someone goes, well, then I'll give it to your spouse or your kids, and then your kids can take you. It's same situation, right?
Let's see here. Jump over to page 33 at the top. Jonathan, a member of a state commission, receives 4 tickets for excellent seats at an NBA basketball game from a business in town. He and his daughter use 2 of them and give the other 2 to his friend Ken. The face value of each ticket is $125. And the accompanying parking pass is valued at $10. Does Jonathan avoid potential violation by giving 2 tickets to Ken? Well, you have 2 choices there. Yes, he avoids it by giving to Ken, or no, giving away the tickets does not avoid the problem. The answer is no. An official receives a gift when he has actual possession of the gift and takes any action exercising direction or control, including transferring it to another person. Jonathan's total gift, therefore, is $510. So you can't give the tickets to someone else and avoid it.
No, say if you're dealing with a vendor, okay, a vendor comes up to you and goes, okay, I'll give you Sacramento Kings tickets, front row seat. No, I'm not going to take them.
Well, these are fine, so there's no getting there.
And so what happens if he gives it to my spouse or child, and then my spouse or child takes me to the game?
He's just giving you a gift.
Okay.
Yeah.
So same thing.
He's giving you a gift. And why do we care? Because we all want to know whether someone's being influenced by someone. I mean, if these tickets were given away randomly to everybody, well, you don't want it, I'll give it to your wife, and he goes down the street and knocks on every door and is giving away the tickets. But if this is a single issue and he's giving it to you and then not you, your wife and child, well then, is he gonna go to the next door and do the same thing, or is it because he knows you? Yeah. Let's see here. Bottom of page 30, gifts made to the official and family member equals gift to official for full value. So there's your answer in black and white. Gift given to directly to family members, gift to official if, and then you can see the official uses the gift, controls who gets it. So I think you can refuse the gift, you can give them back, you can donate them to charity. And then entertainment tickets, do not have to report it if the agency has a written policy stating the public purpose for distribution. This is you giving a ticket. And it can't be earmarked for use by a particular official, and the official's name is identified on the website. And the exempt value from the limitation must be disclosed on Form 700, except for, and wedding gifts, half the value attributed to each spouse, and prizes that result from a bona fide competition not related to official status. Exceptions to the gift: if you return it in 30 days, it's from a close relative, you don't use those tickets, or it's informational materials. Gift limitations exempt from value, both limitation and disclosure in the Form 100. Personalized plaques worth less than $250. Hospitality, your friend has you over for dinner. Tickets to campaign events or a fundraiser for a 501c3 corporation. Bona fide campaign contributions, again, not planning commission issue, and exchanged with another in connection with birthdays, holidays, or similar events. This assumes you have a pre-existing relationship that you would be doing this otherwise. So, at the bottom of page 33, honorarium. An honorarium is any payment for a speech, article published, or attendance at a conference. Generally, they are 100% prohibited. And then exceptions to the honoraria ban. I like to say if you're a professional speaker, you can get paid for being a professional speaker, but then it becomes a source of income, doesn't it? Yeah. So, travel payments. I'm on the bottom of page 35. Certain travel payments may be subject to gift limit restrictions and or may be reportable. Travel payments include payments, advances, or reimbursements for travel, including actual transportation, as well as related lodging and sustenance. Travel payments not prohibited or subject to the gift limit, but may be reportable. So free admission somewhere where you're making a speech, or travel reasonably related to a legislative purpose. And then case analysis, here we go. Cy is a deputy director of a water agency and has accumulated 20,000 miles on his personal airline mileage program and is entitled to a free ticket anywhere in the country where his airline flies. May Cy accept the ticket? Yes, he may, or no, accepting it would violate the free transportation ban. Answer, yes. The tickets, because it was earned as part of a program designed to promote the airline, and the program was offered to the public generally without regard to official status. Okay. What are the penalties? The giver and receiver can be liable for up to 3 times the amount of the unlawful gift or honoraria, and the FPPC can get into the act and impose up to $5,000 fine. All right.
Okay, on this situation, so say, even though we don't have, a city airline mileage program, if there's a city airline mileage program, then you're gaining points can you use those points to go on a personal vacation?
I don't see where that's any different from the public program to get a free ticket. I think that's okay, because everybody can do it.
Even with a city card, like if the city's handing out, okay, like airline
They
cards.
let you do that because they'll buy the ticket and they'll accumulate the points.
Yeah, so then allows if you go, okay, yeah, this is, you're using points, the points are because of me traveling, so I'd like to use those points to go.
All the more reason to buy the ticket and seek reimbursement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if the city, I mean, cities usually buy a flight of tickets, and to the extent there's any points or benefits, they roll it into another ticket to give somebody. They're not going to. But if you're seeking reimbursement and you happen to use your credit card, you get reimbursed for your whatever, and that's, nobody's going to worry about the points, because anybody who goes with that program can get those points, right?
Yeah.
But you won't get it through the city because the city will keep those benefits if you're using a city credit card.
Okay.
But the city, Gene, will be smart enough to not even let that happen. They'll just buy the tickets directly.
I don't like city credit card.
I don't either. What's this $50 tip? Misuse of public funds, bottom of page 37. So public expenditures are proper only if implicitly or explicitly authorized by legislative enactment. There's a prohibition for a local official from using public resources for campaign, personal, or unauthorized purposes in violation is a felony, punishable by imprisonment and disqualification from holding office. So, what's the test? Does it have a public purpose? Does the expenditure serve the public interest? Is the purpose of the expenditure to benefit the public interest or the interest of private individuals for private purposes? I once had, long ago, far away in a different city, a councilman suggests that, well, the city should pay for my wife's travel to Anaheim to the League of Cities event because it'll make me very happy, and if I'm happy, I'm productive. No. We might let her come along and stay in the same room because the rate's the same, but that airline ticket, that's on you if you want your wife. So we'll pay for your airline ticket, but not for hers. So yeah, bring her along, pay for her ticket, pay for her meals. Don't add her into the meals of the ticket. So that was a curious question, but I thought the result was pretty clear because we're using public money to send you to the seminar and your registration, not someone else's air flight, even if she's married to you, and not someone else's meals. So that would be a misuse of the funds. The city authorized travel for the official and registration and meals for the official, not for the spouse. Mass mailings don't apply. Prohibition on free or discounted travel. Here is just a little footnote. A transportation company may not grant free passes or discounts to anyone holding office in this state, and the acceptance of a pass or discount by a public officer other than a public utilities commissioner shall work a forfeiture of that office. This harkens back to the days when the railroad was in charge and the legislature and, free railroad transportation to all public officials who wanted to vote for the railroad's next project, right? I'm being a little sarcastic here, but that's where this came from, and it still is there today and says, don't accept a free pass. So, all right. So, now we come to page 41, and I think we've been through this before. This is the Ralph M. Brown Act. So just for fun, let's jump to page 43 and work through a few examples. A group of citizens meet to discuss a proposed new levy. As scheduled, 3 of the 5 members of the levy board spoke at the gathering. They did not discuss district issues among themselves other than as scheduled. Has there been a Brown Act violation? No, you're right, correct. Gathering was a meeting. Board majority was there to hear, discuss, or deliberate an issue. If the gathering is open to all, it may fall into the community meeting exception. It does. I mean, I'll be unequivocal. If the gathering is just at the meeting, they're just fine. Let's try the next one. All members of the Recreation Commission attend an open meeting of a citizens group against duck hunting. The chairperson spots them in the audience and asks them if any of them will address a potential ban on duck hunting. Can they say anything without violating the Brown Act? Well, they can say no, can't they? You're right, they can't say anything. So this appears to be an open and publicized community meeting. However, the commissioners are not scheduled to speak, so they may not discuss the ban or they will violate the Brown Act. All right, page 45, serial meetings. Use of direct communication, personal intermediaries, or technological devices employed by a majority of the members of the legislative body to develop a collective concurrence as to an action to be taken. Chain serial meeting, A calls B, B calls C. Now we get a quorum. In our case, C calls D. We've got 4. All right. Next page, trouble with email. We've talked about the trouble with email. Reply all. And now icons are right at the top of the list. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's see, serial meeting study 1. Member A of a 5-member board emails member B about her view on a pending matter before the board. Okay, we already know 2 people on a 5-member board is fine. Member B responds by email that she concurs with member A. Well, still okay, right? What if member B in her response copies all other board members? Yeah, you've just gone way over the line. All right. And then, of course, yes, it would be considered serial meetings, intermediaries, met, discussed, etc. Let's see. Let's go over to page 48. Developer Sam can call every board member without violating the Brown Act. A citizen's right to contact representatives is protected by the Act. If Sam tells a member the views of other members, it may appear that a Brown Act violation has occurred. Again, I'll say it has occurred if Sam is sharing with the others their views. Members A, B, and C of a 5-person planning commission attend a council meeting and as scheduled present their views on a proposed general plan amendment. During the meeting, A and B privately discuss how these amendments will affect applications soon to be before them. The next day, B calls D and tells him what A and B believe the superstore project will have difficulties if the amendment passes. So the analysis. Presentation during the formal meeting was not a violation because it was a scheduled agenda item. The sidebar discussion was not a violation because it involved less than a quorum. The phone call is probably a serial meeting because it would be likely viewed as an attempt to reach a collective concurrence. I'll tell you, yes, it was a violation. All right. Closed sessions doesn't apply. Let's skip to page 56. Public records, we haven't talked about this yet. Any writings prepared, owned, or used or retained by a public agency, regardless of the physical form or characteristics. It may include employment contracts, salary information. They're subject to inspection during business hours. Be made available for copying upon receipt of a request to do so. The entity has 10 days to respond to the receipt. As to whether or not it will comply, it may have a longer time to actually generate the records if necessary. Denial has to identify the person who says yes or no. And here are some examples of records that are exempt from disclosure. Preliminary drafts not regularly kept, pending litigation, communications from legal counsel, thank goodness. Complaints and investigations, personnel records, library circulation records, financial data, and there are others, and then there's a catch-all exception. The court can order production of records improperly withheld and shall award reasonable attorney's fees to the prevailing party. Before we leave public records, I'll just leave you with this thought. Your communications electronically are public records. So if you use email and you do business, that can be subject. Anyone wants to see them, they can see them. So maybe you have a different device just for city, or you just understand, put it in a folder, keep it in one folder. Just understand that if someone, and it always comes from someone who has an axe to grind, they'll say, oh, I'm going to get every commissioner's emails. So just know that that's out there, and that, so I just gave it from the requester's standpoint, but from us, it's coming the other way. So keep it accurate, keep it clean, because it could be the subject of a disclosure at a later time if someone requests it.
So quick question on that situation. This kind of gave, everybody's texting. So say someone from the public sees one of us up here on our phone texting, could that be a public records?
Well, I don't know, who are you texting?
Yeah, but so that's the question. Could it be a finding, like if they go, I want to see what the guy was doing up there, even though they don't know if it was business related or personal?
Well, there's a certain, if you've ever lost your phone, you'll know how intrusive the request can be. Now, usually we start with the honor system, and we'll ask you to cough up all the texts and emails that pertain to anything relating to the Planning Commission or any business of the city. And you give us your 12 emails and your 5 texts. And then that person finds from someone else 10 others that weren't produced. You might lose your phone for a while someone actually goes in there and looks for all the phrases that maybe you didn't look for. So
there's the potential.
It's more to the city council, but there's no reason why this body couldn't have a similar request.
Yeah.
So you are creating public records when you email and text people about Planning Commission city business. So that's all. It's really a cautionary tale. You don't want to be the test case, and you don't want to have someone else look through your phone. So that's all. It always comes from outside, right?
Yeah.
And if someone says, well, I've got a text here, look at this. They didn't produce that.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, if there's a hot topic up here and one of us is texting, you don't know what's happening on there. So.
It happens, so let's don't wish it.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity,
Yes.
is there any case law on end-to-end encryption programs like, say, Signal or something like that, which automatically deletes the conversation after it's had? Are those barred from use by public officials?
Not to my knowledge. But just stay tuned, because at some point they may be, because the public has, the entity, the city, has the obligation in general to keep its public records for 2 years. That's the general. Although the video of the council meetings only has to be kept for 30 days, but the general retention period is 2 years. Or what if you just delete automatically, delete encrypted and it goes away. then somebody produces again something that someone else retained, and so there just might be the next court case. So I'm not discouraging anyone from using it, but I'm saying that at some point the law in that area may change. It was 5 years ago or so that these devices, you would see, again, at the league meetings, other city council members, yeah, okay, Joe, I can call you back, and put his phone in and pull out his private phone and then keep the conversation going. Because he didn't want to have a record on his public phone. And then the Supreme Court said, no, those are all public records. And the fact that you may pay for the service and pay for the device doesn't stop them from being public records. Gee, we're almost done, and I got to my last page. Let me make sure. Page 59, common law bias. This is that good old quasi-judicial we talked about before. Bias based on personal interest, bias based on unofficial source. Decision should be based on the record, not on what you hear outside of the record. Prohibit on prejudging, should not be committed to an outcome. And let me see, I have one more point. Form 700s. I think you all know you have to disclose your interests when you assume office, annually, and when you leave office. And those are filed with your agency, they're filed here with the city. I'm done. 6:01.
Thank you, Mr. Bortson. I don't believe we have anything else, correct? Anything from the staff?
I guess I'd like to add one thing to that discussion. Really good discussion. Thank you, Brent. You have questions on any of this? Brown Act, Public Records Act, 1234. Ask Brent, pick up the phone, make a call, ask Paul, call your city manager, call me, whoever, get a hold of one of us. Ellen, yeah, so we can get this question answered for you. So if there's anything that comes up that you just, not quite sure of, it's better to call and ask than to, not ask. Okay?
Do your sign-in sheets, sign your certificates, hand them in. You've got your 2 hours for 2 years.
Great. Any other questions from anybody?
We do apologize. We were going to do a swearing in before we started this evening, but we didn't. So if we could we want to be able to try to get you guys sworn in before our next meeting. So I'm going to be reaching out to you for that as well.
Okay, great.
One other question. I can't sign a document because I'm not present. Should I just swing by later this week to fill that out?
Yeah.
Is there a preferred time for staff for me to drop by?
Yeah, no, we can arrange a time.
Okay.
Great. All right, thank you. Meeting adjourned.